I came to bust ghosts and do movie reviews, and I'm all out of ghosts. Should I have used this as the opening to my Ghostbusters review? Probably, but I didn't think about it at the time. I didn't even take this out of the bag at the time. This is the cool ghost trap that I got. Look, it even lights up. Look, check this out. Look, it lights up. You can't really see it. It's too bright in here, but it does. It lights up, so. Immaculate. That's the movie we're talking about here today. Let's do the review.
Yeşil loves.
Immaculate is directed by Michael Mohan and it stars Sydney Sweeney as a nun from Detroit who goes to an Italian convent and somehow becomes pregnant. This is the newest horror movie to hit theaters and a movie that I was looking forward to mostly for Sydney Sweeney. I'm not going to sit here and lie because the idea of a nun getting pregnant, that genre of movie of potentially the Antichrist being born, that's something that's been done so many times before that I wasn't sure how original this was going to be. So going into the movie, my thoughts essentially were just, I hope it's a creepy, atmospheric movie, and I hope overall I have a good time. And I could say to both of those points, yeah, it was creepy atmosphere throughout. There were some really gory moments that we'll talk about here in a little bit, and I had a decent enough time with it. This is one of the better movies that's come out this year, and maybe even the best horror movie that's come out in 2024 so far. With that said, let's get into my positives and some of my negatives. My first positive for this movie has to be Sydney Sweeney. I think she does a fantastic job as this nun. She has three different moods overall in this movie. The first one is very shy and innocent and sort of hopeful for the world around her. And then she gets very scared and ready to run away from the world that she's currently in. And finally, she has a very much so fighter attitude that leads to some really messed up moments at the end of this movie. And I think she does all three of those personas really well. I think she plays innocent and sweet and sort of helpful and just not understanding the cruel world, but by the end of this movie, she's ready to take on that cruel world, and my God, does she take it on. So I enjoyed the way she acted in this movie. I think she is by far the standout actress in this movie, and I think that, yes, people have said it online, but I'll echo it here. She's legitimately a scream queen now. She belongs in more horror. You put her in more horror, I'm gonna go see it. She was fantastic in this. Next positive I have for this movie is how the movie looks. It's filmed on location in Rome, and there are some moments in this movie that are just gorgeous to look at. They belong on a big screen, and that's always something I'm gonna give a movie praise for, because you can tell when a movie like Ant-Man is filmed on a soundstage the entire time. And people are like, the CGI was great, or people say the CGI sucked, I could tell it was a soundstage, but you're just debating over whether or not a computer graphic was good enough for you. Whereas when you have real landscape, when you have something real, and they're in Italy in this movie, so filming in Rome, it's just, you get that architecture, you get that look, and it just looked so much better. So I give this movie praise for the way it looks, but also just being bold, filming on location, not just filming in a studio somewhere in the US. I really appreciated that. My next positive would be the shocking, gory visuals that are in this movie. And I have said in many reviews in the past, whether I'm positive or negative on the movie, if there's a lot of gore, I just want there to be a reason for that gore. So in movies like Terrifier 2, I feel like they're way over the top gory. And while I do have a little bit more appreciation for that movie since I made my review, I still stand on the fact that gore for the sake of gore is not something that I personally am into. People may like it, people may love it, but I'm just not into it. However, I'll put the gory visuals into the positive column for this movie because I think Immaculate does it well. It blends the story with the need for that intense gore. When you've got a cult of people trying to have you birth a baby that's supposed to be the next Christ or something along those lines, when you have a cult of people trying to do that and you have to fight them off, it's gonna get gross. It's gonna get nasty. And I think that this movie called for the level of gore that it had, and I appreciate that. To me, it's like, I'm gonna compare it to the Saw movies. I think that the Saw movies call for the level of gore that you're going to get. So I appreciate when a movie can do that, and this movie definitely did that. My final positive for this movie is going to be the spin that they put on the birthing Antichrist genre horror movie. We've gotten a lot of them in the past. And a lot of this movie does feel familiar. We'll talk about that in my negatives here in a second. But I did like how they were able to put a spin on it toward the end of this movie, and it was something that I personally hadn't seen before. And I don't want to spoil it here, it just has to do with Jesus. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't yet, yeah, it has to do with Jesus, and it's kind of cool how they were able to make her immaculately concept this baby. For me, that worked for me. I liked that. I thought that spin on the genre was something different, something unique. And again, with horror, so many old tropes are used all the time. So whenever you throw something new in the mix and you're like, hey, maybe you'll see it from this perspective, we'll do it a little bit differently. And we'll use a little bit of science to try and explain away some of this horror movie magic instead of just going, well, it's a horror movie, so they were able to do this. It's just how it works. Instead, they were able to sort of break it down for me. This is how we were able to do it. And I thought that was kind of cool. It had a little bit of a Jurassic Park vibe. That's all I'm going to say. All right, that was my final positive. Let's move on to the negatives. My first negative for this movie is going to be the supporting cast around Sydney Sweeney. I already gave my reasons as to why I think Sydney Sweeney did a fantastic job. I think she's on a roll right now with her movies where it doesn't matter what she's in, she shines, and I think she did a great job. However, the supporting cast in this movie, no one was really convincing. Nobody really felt like they were bringing the level that Sydney Sweeney brought to the screen, and maybe that was on purpose. Maybe they were like, hey, all of the big emotion needs to come from Sydney Sweeney's character, whereas the rest of the characters just have to sort of lurk in the background and be evil. And that didn't really work for me because I would have wanted a little bit more out of them. Even the main villain in this movie, the guy who's behind her getting pregnant in this movie, the guy who's trying to create the next Christ in this movie, even he just didn't feel like he was on the same level of acting that Sydney Sweeney is. Like, he didn't feel like he was bringing it the way that Sydney Sweeney brought it. Like, I enjoyed his performance to a point, but even then he just sort of turns into your villain of the week who's got this plan, and like, he had everything but the twirling mustache. Like, he just seemed like, hey, I've got this villainous plan, now I'm going to explain it all to you so the viewers can know it. Like, it didn't come across as genuine, whereas all of her performances did. So for me, the supporting cast in this movie didn't really work. My other negative for this movie is that while the film felt fresh in that the spin on this genre film of the next Christ or the next Antichrist, whatever the case may be, while that felt fresh, and I praise the movie for that, the rest of this movie felt like something I've seen so many times before. If you have anything in the cult Catholic genre horror movie, all those tropes are in this movie. If you have anything in the birth of the Antichrist, whether it's the Omen movies, all of those tropes are in this movie. And so it's just one of those things where this movie felt very familiar throughout, and I give them credit for giving me a little bit of a spin towards the end, and I give them credit for that gory madness they give you at the end. But the rest of the movie felt so familiar that it's just kind of like, all right, well, I've seen most of this before. That's what it felt like. Overall, I'll say that I had a good time with this movie. It's one of the better films I've seen so far this year, and it's definitely a flick I would recommend to people who are looking for a good horror movie. However, if you get easily offended by the Catholic Church doing some shady stuff, maybe this movie's not for you. And if you get easily offended by copious amounts of gore, then you'll definitely want to stay away from this movie. But for my money, I had a good time with it. I would recommend it. But those are just my opinions because that's my review for Immaculate. Guys, have you had a chance to see Immaculate yet? If you have, let me know in the comment section down below. I'd love to know what you think about it. Maybe we agree or disagree on this movie. Maybe some of my positives or some of your negatives. Who knows? Let me know in the comment section down below. And finally, guys, if you like this content and you want to watch more, don't forget to hit the like button because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of the Immaculate review, and I had a good time with this movie. Best horror movie of 24 so far, so looking forward to more horror. Somebody pointed out the other day when I said that the horror that was coming out just wasn't very good and I didn't have much hope for it. They were like, what about Maxine? What about this? What about this? What about this? And I was like, alright, there are good horror movies coming. Hopefully good. I mean, we hope they're going to be good. Horror's not a dead genre, but it takes a movie like this to make me excited for horror again because, January and February were rough. But glad we got Immaculate. Looking forward to the next one. Hey, if you want to check out any of the other horror movie reviews I've done on my channel, I've got all of my horror movie reviews right there. And I've got all of my 2024 movie reviews right there.